Welcome to a new episode of Out from the Horrorbox. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different from what we've done normally in the past. So normally I do a review or I give you guys some kind of news, but I think I just want to kind of go through some kind of spooky stories and get you guys in the mood for some of that. Because horror isn't always just about movies, it's not always about video games. It's about going back to just listening to some scary stories and being spooked out, right? So, what I want you guys to do, and hopefully I'll be able to make this into kind of like a series, because I got some stuff coming up that I will be able to hopefully get more content out, because I know I've been lacking. It's been kind of rough with some things that have been going on. So I'm going to get you guys more things, but just in the meantime, let's just listen to some spooky stories. Turn off the lights, right? Make sure it's dark. You know, if you need to, get a little high to get into the mood, do it. If you need a little bit of drink to get into the mood, do it. Whatever you need to do to get you into that oh so spooky mood. Even if it is just like chillaxing, listening to it in the middle of the day with all the lights on. I want whatever is best for you to be in the mood to listen to some scary stories, right? So now that everybody's right in the mood, let's get into some spooky stories. Whether it's ghosts, UFOs, or monsters, these creepy real-life stories represent the scariest tales from the annals of human history. These are true scary stories that are almost too creepy to believe. First up, we have the mystery of the Enfield Monster. One night in 1973, the two young McDaniel children of Enfield, Illinois, claimed to see a weird creature lurking in their yard and trying to get it into the house. But their father, Henry McDaniel, chalked their creepy story up to the active imagination of childhood. However, he changed his mind later that night after being awoken by strange scratching sounds. McDaniel grabbed a gun and a flashlight and peered outside his front door. There, between two rose bushes, he saw a creature that was almost like a human body, just as his kids had described. It had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights, he recounted to a reporter. McDaniel said he fired 4 shots and was sure he hit the creature at least once, causing it to make a hiss, much like a wild cat's, before it ran off toward a railway embankment. McDaniel was stunned when he saw the monstrous beast jump 80 feet in 3 jumps before quickly running out of sight. The police found scratches on the door screen as well as footprints in the dirt near McDaniel's home that looked dog-like with 6 toe pads, yet no clues pointed to any unusual creatures. McDaniel's sightings made the reading eagle, but it was clear most people didn't believe it was true. It didn't help that 10-year-old neighbor faked his own eyewitness account of the beast, only later to admit that his testimony was a prank against the McDaniels. McDaniel reported 2 more sightings of the alleged beast to local cops, but he said they eventually threatened him with jail time because nobody believed what he had saw. But McDaniel was adamant and stood behind his scary story. If they do find it, McDaniel said in an interview, they will find more than one, and they won't be from this planet, I can tell you that. After McDaniel's public testimony about the Enfield Monster, other eyewitnesses' claims began to surface. Monster hunters swarmed the town, and at least 5 men were arrested after finding shots in the area and claiming to have photographed the creature. To this day, no explanation has been uncovered for the small-town creepy story. Yeah, I'd heard about this one before, the Enfield Monster. I know that there's some sketches of like what the kids saw and what he saw, and it looks kind of creepy. There's one rendering that's on here that they show, which makes it even more creepy. But just imagine, like, you see something, you can't tell what it is. I mean, you're describing it to somebody, and they're like, no, that's not what you saw. And you're like, yeah, not only did I see it once, I've seen it multiple times. And they just keep telling you no, no. At some point, do you think you're the crazy one? Because, like, you're like, I'm seeing it, but no one else is believing me. And then also to add on top of that, like someone else comes out with their own little fake story, and they just either capitalize on the hysteria or to like this one kid did, just to kind of get back at the McDaniels. But it's still kind of creepy when you're the one who's like, I'm seeing it. I can see it. It's right there. I keep seeing it. It keeps coming to me. Like like in the Twilight Zone with the little goblin that's on the terror at 1,000 or 10,000 feet or whatever, when he's on the airplane and he sees it out on the wing, and whenever anyone else comes to look at it, it's not there, and only he keeps seeing it. But it's like, so if you're seeing this thing and you're constantly seeing it, but no one else is seeing it, is it really there? Who knows? Creepy stories of people literally being saved by the bell. The term saved by the bell is an idiom commonly used to describe people who escape difficult situations thanks to a last minute solution. But the lighthearted phrase actually may have a true scary story behind it, related to a medical condition known as catalepsy. Catalepsy is a medical condition in which a patient endures an uncontrolled state of muscle rigidity and unresponsiveness. The condition is often linked to episodes of catatonia. Although the disease is widely understood now, in the past it caused sufferers to be mistakenly buried alive. After newspapers reported on these tragic endings, writers like Edgar Allan Poe built similar incidents into their own creepy stories. The frequency of catalepsy patients being mistaken for dead people led to a string of quick fix solutions by doctors and gravekeepers, though many of these ideas created new horrors of their own. One well-intentioned yet morbid solution was the creation of waiting mortuaries. In these hospitals for the dead, the bodies of sudden catatonic patients were kept under observation for a few days to make sure they were actually dead. Waiting mortuaries were well stocked with food, wine, and cigars in the event that the patient woke up. Another more gruesome solution to avoid burying those who were still alive was to perform examinations to test the deadness of the patient. People thought to be dead had their fingers hacked off or endured smoke being literally blown up their butt. The assumption was that if the person didn't wake up, then that meant they were unequivocally dead. Otherwise, the procedure was used to revive those who were on the edge of death via tobacco's supposed restorative properties. There was only one problem with such tests. Catalepsy prevents patients from feeling pain during their catatonic state, so employing extreme measures proved to be an ineffective method of confirming whether a person was dead or alive. True scary stories of being buried alive also spawned the creation of safety coffins. In 18th and 19th century Europe, especially Victorian England, enough people were being mistakenly buried alive that coffin makers came up with a number of solutions. These caskets were designed with above-ground horns or bells that people who found themselves mistakenly buried alive could ring from the inside when they woke up trapped underground. Some of these safety coffins also came equipped with a stash of poison in case the person figured out they wouldn't be saved. Other models used glass panes that would fog up if the person was still breathing. Some had tubes that gravekeepers would have to sniff each day to confirm the body inside was actually decomposing. Other people were simply buried with the keys to their own coffin in their pocket. But the bell models were among the most pervasive. These morbid contraptions were allegedly where the phrase "saved by the bell" came from, according to some. It's unclear whether safety coffins did any good to reduce the number of people who were accidentally buried alive, but the thought of being trapped with no escape for eternity is enough to send a chill down your spine. Especially for me, who is someone who is claustrophobic. That would be horrible to just wake up and you're in a place, there's no light, there's barely any air, you're in a confined space, you're yelling, screaming, pounding, and you're like, get me out, get me out. And then you're hyperventilating because you're freaked out because you're in a small space, so you're using up all your air. It would just be a horrible way to die. I mean, even just to just oh my god, I can't even imagine that. That'd be horrible. I hate scenes where they get like in Kill Bill when she gets trapped in the when they bury her alive. Like, God, that's terrible, horrible, horrifying to just think about that. Ugh. The unexplained numbers stations. At the height of the Cold War, when radio was still a top medium for disseminating news and information, many listeners accidentally stumbled into some rather unnerving programming. These creepy broadcasts would typically begin with a strange melody or several beeps and were followed by the voice of a woman or child reciting seemingly random numbers. These transmissions played routinely and lasted for several minutes on frequencies that listeners dubbed numbers stations. The discovery of these strange numbers stations quickly gained attention among those who were unfortunate to find themselves listening to these mysterious broadcasts. The phenomenon also spawned a fringe group of radio listeners dedicated to solving the mystery of who was sending these broadcasts and why. Each numbers station they discovered was given a name depending on the nature of the broadcast. Among the most well-known were the Nancy Adams Susan, the Gong Station, and the Lincolnshire Poacher. They were all uniquely bizarre in their own way, spurring a number of creepy stories about who could possibly be behind them. It wasn't until the 1980s that amateur sleuths tracking these number stations hypothesized that the mysterious broadcasts were actually coded messages used in espionage operations across the globe. The idea has been supported by figures like Rupert Allison, an author who specializes in espionage and writes under the pen name Nigel West. Nobody has found a more convenient and expedient way of communicating with an agent. Allison said, their sole purpose is for intelligence agencies to communicate with their agents in denied areas, the territory where it is difficult to use a consensual form of communication. Remarkably, these short waves of alleged coded messages can still be found on the radio today, so long as one is diligent enough to search for them. Espionage tactics may seem like the most plausible explanation for these ghostly signals, but the true intent of some of these number stations have never been cracked. One station, known as the Buzzer, has been sending out mysterious broadcasts since the Cold War. It features 2 buzzes at the top of every hour, followed by a monotonous drone between every 21st and 34th minute during daylight hours. A voice follows reading a string of numbers, words, or names in Russian like Anna, Nikolai, Ivan, Tatiana, Roman. It was initially believed that the broadcast was set up by Soviet authorities, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the strange radio broadcasts only became more active. To this day, nobody knows who started it, what it's about, or why it continues. The true scary story of the number stations goes on. They are very creepy. If you haven't listened to them, go online, listen. I'm going to play one really quick, but I'm pretty sure this is what the numbers on Lost were kind of based on or influenced by. You see this in later seasons where you find out that the broadcast tower has been broadcasting the numbers, which in an earlier season was picked up by another character who originally used those numbers to win some local fair game, and then those numbers were given over to someone else, and he has been repeating them in a psych ward the whole time, and that's when Hurley picked up the numbers. But the numbers are just they're just random numbers. But then you find out that the numbers actually mean something, that they're each assigned to a particular person who is supposed to be touched as a candidate for taking over for Jacob, which if you don't know the mythology of Lost as much as I do, then this is pretty funny, and probably you're what, Lost, why are you talking about it? whatever. I love Lost. But anyways, here is one that always creeps me out. It's the Lincolnshire Poacher. So it's that for a few seconds, about a minute, and then it starts playing this. Then it goes into this. And from there, it just keeps continuing to play numbers and just repeats them over and over again. And I think it just plays this little tune, which is the Lincolnshire Poacher, which is the do 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 do. That's the actual. That song's called the Lincolnshire Poacher. And I always thought like that one. There's a couple of other ones that are honestly just go look it up on YouTube. You can find a bunch of them. I always think that they're creepy because it's like, yeah, like, I mean, okay, if these are spying, like, okay, I guess it's one answer, but then if it's not, like, what else are they used for? Like, what else are they there to do? Right? The terror of Operation Wandering Soul. If there's anything more effective than physical weapons to defeat enemy soldiers in a war, it's psychological terror. That's just what U.S. troops employed during their invasion in the Vietnam War. In Vietnamese culture, giving a proper burial to a loved one in their birthplace ensures their contentment in the afterlife. If not, it is believed the deceased soul will wander aimlessly as it tries to find its way home. U.S. forces in Vietnam were aware of this belief and took advantage of it to cause terror. Knowing that the Vietnamese people were worried many of their soldiers would die far from home and unable to be buried properly, U.S. forces employed a freaky psychological scare tactic known as Operation Wandering Soul. The 6th Psychological Operations Battalion of the U.S. Army broadcasted disturbing moans of disembodied voices throughout the Vietnam jungle where the battles took place. These fake tapes were played on a series of loudspeakers or dispatched from overheard planes. For many Vietnamese soldiers, hearing the cries of supposedly lost souls piercing through the dark was nothing short of terrifying. And right here, I'm going to play it really quick. A part of the tape that they have. The scare tactic was inspired by the Ghost Army of World War II, a unit of inflatable tanks and personnel carriers used to fool German intelligence forces. into thinking the Allies had more troops and tanks than they actually did. These hair-raising messages that played in the Vietnam battlefield successfully convinced many nervous Vietnamese soldiers that their fallen comrades were sulking around invisibly among them. Many of the fake ghost messages recorded were created with the help of South Vietnamese allies and voiced pleas to the soldiers to give up the fight. My friends, I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. Don't end up like me. Go home, friends, before it's too late. The tapes were convincing enough to send hundreds of men fleeing from the mountains. Of course, not all Vietnamese soldiers fell for this spooky psychological operation. But even in the midst of a war, it still struck a chord. The soldiers who remained fired in the direction of the eerie voices, reminding them of the very real possibility of death that awaited them if defeated. That's creepy. That's why I don't even know why you would do that. I mean, I understand why the U.S. Army did that, because they wanted to reduce the number of soldiers that they're fighting and win. But that's still ridiculous that they would trick them with like their own like beliefs like that. I mean, whose side am I on, right? It's still just imagine being out there and you're in the jungle, the forest, and I mean, it's pretty okay, but you still hear these people that you believe are spirits wandering around now because they were not able to be put to rest, and they're like, go back home, or this is going to be your fate. Ooh. And it sounds pretty convincing because it's just echoing out there. I don't know. I'd be pretty creeped out. I'd probably go home. I wouldn't want to listen to that after a while. But, like, just the things that the Americans, that the U.S. do sometimes in war is, not sometimes, all the time, is ridiculous. But that's neither here nor there. It's just creepy that they would do this. The Tucker telephone torture device. Of all the true scary stories about life inside Americans' jail, the Tucker telephone is surely the most awful. And for inmates doing time at the Tucker State Prison Farm in Arkansas in the early 1960s was nothing more terrifying than the Tucker telephone. The Tucker telephone was a sadistic method of punishment frequently used on prisoners at the state prison, which is now the Tucker unit of the Arkansas Department of Correction. The torture device was the brainchild of prison physician Dr. A.E. Rollins and prison superintendent Jim Bruton. On its face, the device looks like an old crank telephone, but with the addition of an electric generator and 2 dry cell batteries. It became one of the most notorious torture machines in the history of U.S. incarceration. Hooked up to a source of immense electric power, the Tucker telephone functioned as an electric shock device attached to the private parts of victims. Inmates sent to the hospital room, quote unquote, were strapped down to a table with 2 wires applied to their skin. The ground wire was wrapped around their big toe, while the hot wire, with the electricity running through it, was strapped to the inmate's genitals. Once the doctors turned the crank on the Tucker telephone, the victims were brutally shocked by torrents of electricity. Sometimes these torture sessions dragged on for long periods, known as long-distance calls, quote-unquote. The sheer barbarism of this punishment method was described in Tom Merton's shocking 1970 book, Accomplices to the Crime, The Arkansas Prison Scandal. This is a quote from the book. In long-distance calls, several charges were inflicted, of a duration designed to stop just short of the inmates fainting. Sometimes the telephone operator's skill was so defective, and the sustained current not only caused the inmate to lose consciousness, but resulted in irreparable damage to his testicles. End quote. Tragically, many of the prisoners not only ended up with permanent organ damage, but also suffered from mental illness following the torture. But the Tucker telephone wasn't an isolated incident. A Newsweek report from 1967 revealed that prisoners were routinely beaten with paddles, had needles stuck under their fingernails, tortured with pliers, and punished using an electric chair. The brutality of the prison became so famous that the Tucker telephone eventually found itself depicted in the 1980 film Brubaker. Unfortunately, even after the torture device was no longer deployed against inmates, the Tucker telephone was repurposed by the Chicago Violent Crime Unit under Lieutenant John Burge to torture suspects in the 1980s. American interrogators abroad have also reportedly used the device to torture their captives. It's kind of funny how we like in America, and I mean the United States of America, we like to think of this time where we would like torture prisoners and use the electric chair and use these cruel and unusual punishments. Back like but that was like the 1800s. That was like the 1700s. That was so long ago. It's like then you look at this and you see that okay, well that was the 1960s when that was being used, the Tucker telephone, and it says that it was still being used until the 80s. The 80s is only what, like 40 years ago. I mean, and then even I think the electric chair was still being used up until a certain point in the 90s, I think, or even the early 2000s. I'm not 100% sure, but it's just ridiculous that like we like to think of this as like, oh, that's the past. That's the past. We put it behind us. We don't do this anymore. We don't treat people like that anymore. It's like yes, we do. It's just it's changed to different things that we do now to torture them, to punish them for things that may not have even been in their, maybe something that they didn't even do, one, maybe something that was out of their control, two, and then maybe, I mean, sure, maybe somebody did something bad, right? But does that mean that they deserve to be tortured for what they did? This is a whole topic that needs to be discussed onto its own, but I don't believe that we should be torturing people at all. Even, I mean, just imagine like there's so many like who gets to choose what punishment and what you get to do, and why do they get to choose that? Oh, because they work for the government. Oh, because they got hired to work here, and they have a quote unquote badge, like, but who they were hired there by some random person that was elected, maybe, and maybe somebody that was appointed, and it's like that other person was elected, maybe. And it's like, so we're not even choosing who gets to be in there, and they're not even being vetted correctly. But that's neither here nor there. This is just, to me, it's still scary to think that like you could be charged with a crime that unto itself is scary, that you didn't even commit, and then you're put into a prison for a lifetime, and then not only are you going through the endless gangs and the endless rituals that they do to join their gangs, or just because you don't want to be a part of that, and things that they endure themselves, and then you put the added pressure of these people who are just brought in to supervise them, and they can kind of torture these people however they want just because they want to. It's the whole idea of the prison system here in America is scary. It is really scary, and it affects people of color more than it does the majority people. I'm not going to say specifically who those people are. They're Caucasian. I'm going to say it. They are white people. And it's just ridiculous that they see this happen and they go, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. It's a good thing this doesn't happen anymore. That was like the 1800s, wasn't it? When like Edison and this and that, blah, 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 when he was electrifying elephants. And it's like, no, this was like within your lifetime. Within most people's lifetimes that are alive today. So, yeah, that's really scary. The Beast of Gévaudan. In 18th century Gévaudan, an idyllic country territory in France, a horrific series of slayings and scary stories about a killer had residents up in arms. But the perpetrator was believed to be not a man, but a beastly monster that resembled a wolf. The first victim was Jeanne Boulet, a 14-year-old shepherdess who was mysteriously found dead in 1764 with her throat ripped out. Then another teen victim was discovered a month later. The second victim allegedly described their killer as a horrible beast before taking their last breath. Hundreds were mauled with their throats or chests ripped out. Creepy stories from those who claimed to have survived or witnessed the attacks described an enormous wolf-like animal with black fur, a large chest, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. These witness accounts peppered the newspapers, which quickly dubbed the mysterious creature as the Beast of Gévaudan. Locals organized hunting parties in the wake of the brutal killings. Jean-Baptiste Dumont, an infantry leader of the local militia, organized 30,000 volunteers to hunt down and kill the beast with the promise of a year's salary as the reward. Still, the hunting campaigns were unsuccessful and the body count continued to grow. According to the scary stories that spread across the countryside, a farmer named Jean Chastel, who lost many loved ones to the Beast of Gévaudan, decided to take matters into his own hands. He allegedly wandered into the mountains, armed with nothing but a pistol and some silver bullets. After taking a rest to read the Bible in the hopes of luring the creature, the alleged beast appeared in front of him. Somehow Chastel managed to shoot and kill the beast, triumphantly presenting it later to the king. Some claim that a cornucopia of human remains tumbled out of the wolf's stomach when it was cut open. These creepy stories famously inspired Robert Louis Stevenson's 1879 book, Travels with a Donkey, in the Cevennes, I can't pronounce that, and pop culture adaptations like Christophe Gans's 2002 horror film, Brotherhood of the Wolf. But was there really a supernatural wolf terrorizing France? Historians have yet to agree on what exactly happened at Gévaudan. Some say it was simply mass hysteria and the murderous pack of wolves or lions that likely caused the killings were exaggerated into a monster. Nevertheless, one thing remains clear. An estimated 300 people were brutally killed during the tragic period. Perhaps the true scary story is that nobody will ever know what may have caused those very real deaths. And I remember this from a long time ago. I mean, seeing it on like those like histories, mysteries, and like different like scary stuff on like Travel Channel. Like they always bring this one up, and it's always intriguing to me because it's like at a time when it's like, okay, this could just have been like a fanciful like thing, like they could have just been making it up. But then like some of these people, because like one theory is that like the king had like a zoo, right, and one of the like lions or maybe like a hyena could have gotten out and was just like roaming around, and like that's what was killing people. And maybe that kind of accounts for why like they describe it kind of like a wolf, but like the fur doesn't really kind of match up, or like the patterns on it don't match up. But then there are other accounts where you see where it's like none of these people are seeing, they describe a wolf, but it's just like a bigger wolf that's like and has like this darker fur. Maybe it's like maybe it was like a dire wolf that maybe like the small contingent of like dire wolves hadn't died out, and maybe that's what it was, because that could theoretically kind of describe what was happening, because dire wolves are bigger than regular wolves, and I think they have like darker fur sometimes too. But I mean, this has been a mystery since then, and we have, I think they had, I know that the king was given like its pelt or something, like they delivered it, but I think it got lost or something. It's something crazy like that. But yeah, this is just like an interesting kind of story, because it's like, was it something more supernatural, or was it something that like maybe it was an animal we know, maybe it was just a regular, or not a regular wolf, but a wolf, but like maybe it had a slight mutation where it was a little bit bigger, maybe it had like darker fur or something. I mean, you never know. Creepy stories of those who had the deadly phone number. Some superstitions hold that certain numbers are bad luck. One cell phone number issued by a Bulgarian phone company in particular actually seems to be connected to the deaths of at least 3 people, all of whom had used the same number before their ominous deaths. Whether a coincidence or not, the unlucky cell phone number 0888 888 888 has since become synonymous with deadly bad luck. The first victim, in fact, was the former CEO of the mobile phone company Mobiltel named Vladimir Grashnov. He died of cancer at the age of 48 in 2001, shortly after receiving the number from his former company. Rumors suggest the real cause of Grashnov's death was that he was being slowly poisoned by a competitor. 2 years later, the alleged curse hit the next victim of the unlucky mobile number, Konstantin Dimitrov, a Bulgarian mafia boss gunned down while having dinner with his model girlfriend, was killed at the age of 31. Investigators suspect it was a hit job by a rival drug boss. The third and final victim to hold the ill-fated number was Konstantin Dishlev, who was shot to death while sitting down at an Indian restaurant in 2005. Dishlev, like the previous owner of the mobile phone number, was engaged with the underground criminal world. He was known as a crooked businessman who operated a secret drug trafficking operation. It might strike an observer of this true scary story that these high-profile victims would likely have died with or without the number, particularly those who were entangled in drug trafficking. But the fact that all three men died within a 5-year period was enough for the mobile phone company to pull the number out of circulation. Yet the creepy stories of the deadly phone number live on to this day. I don't know. I think it's a little too coincidental that, all those people, died. Even if it was within a certain amount of time, it's like when you talk about the curse of like King Tut or like the curse of like the mummies and stuff. This stuff is just like, one, they were going into a place where they were like known viruses and like bacteria and stuff are like bound to be like just everywhere because it's a decomposing corpse. Like it's gonna be everywhere. And like the fact that it was cancer, okay, well he was gonna get cancer either way. And then like the other two, they're involved with like these shady dealings. It's like, okay, if it was like the number was passed between like three different people within the same year because one was like struck by a car, and then the next one, like their plane exploded, and then the next one like he was like running and I don't know, maybe some random like gun went off and like hit him in the head, like that had nothing like to do with him. You know what I mean? Like if it was something like that, like where it was like, yeah, you could chalk those up to accidents, but like it's weird that they keep happening to these people with these numbers. But this one is just like, I don't know. Maybe that I think it's a little too coincidental for that to be, especially compared to some of these other stories. I feel like, okay, come on, really? At that point, like, you're really gonna sit here and tell me that that's like a true, like that's really what's going on here? We do say that about a lot of things that like could be like made up, but enough. Like I don't know. Who knows? The 1969 Berkshire UFO incident. Today, Berkshire County, Massachusetts, is famous for its wide-open countryside that makes it a popular vacation destination. But the rural territory has once heralded a hotbed of UFO activity following the alleged sighting that took place on the evening of September 1st, 1969. More than 50 years later, the true scary story of the Berkshire UFO incident remains perhaps the most chilling tale of an alien abduction on record. According to witnesses' creepy stories, a disc-shaped craft was seen performing aerobatic maneuvers in the sky above the Berkshires that night. Others say they didn't just see the craft but were taken aboard it. It's unclear exactly how long the phenomenon lasted, but many who claim to have witnessed the Berkshire UFO describe losing time, unable to account for an hour or so during the incident. Everything got really calm, said Thomas Reed, one of the most well-known witnesses of the 1969 Berkshire UFO phenomenon. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. There was like a barometric change in pressure. It was just like a dead silence. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs, and it got really loud, and that was it. It was estimated that at least 40 residents, including children who are now adults still living in the Berkshire area, saw the alleged alien craft. Some of them reportedly called into the local radio station to share the bizarre phenomenon that they had just seen. We had listeners call the radio station that evening, said David Ives, general manager of local radio station WSBS. At the time, they didn't know it was a UFO. They just, called the station to say something bizarre has happened. The large number of simultaneous witness accounts during the UFO Berkshire incidents has made it a distinct case among alleged sightings in recent decades. The witness accounts were so plentiful and compelling that the Great Barrington Historical Society decided to officially recognize the incident as the first off-world UFO case in U.S. history, some 45 years after it happened. Following the stunning recognition, witnesses formed the non-profit UFO Monument Park, Inc. to build a monument in the area. The monument meant as a landmark to honor the alleged UFO encounter that residents saw in 1969 was erected by the group and signed by Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. Despite the significant eyewitness accounts of the event, some residents of the town have fought to keep scary stories of the alleged UFO incident under wraps. The monument was removed following contentious arguments between the group of witnesses that built the structure and local officials in 2019. Still, the eerie aftermath of the unexplained encounter stays with residents who bore witness that fateful night and who continue to share the creepy story to this day. Man, that's creepy. Just imagine, being a little kid, right? And you're seeing this thing, right? You're seeing something. You're seeing, because as someone who has seen, and I'm not saying it was an alien. I'm just saying it was something unexplained, correct? Let's just say. So, seeing something in the air that is not normal, you feel weird. You're like, what am I seeing? What am I seeing here? What is this? So if anyone's familiar with the area that I live in, which is the East Valley of the Phoenix metro area. So I live near Scottsdale, Tempe, and Mesa. I live in Mesa. But me and my friend, we were picking up his cousin from work, and we were driving east on the street called Camelback, and we got to another street called Hayden. And on this particular intersection, there is a park on one side, which is the east side, and the west side has apartments and another stretch of park too, but I think it's just mainly grass, not used as part of the park, whatever. So we're heading east, and we stop at the stoplight, and we look up into the sky north, about northeast, and we look at, the people in the car next to us are looking up at it too. There's these lights that are just moving around, and they're just moving in odd ways that they're not plane craft. It wasn't a plane craft at all, any kind of plane that I've seen, because they were moving around, kind of moving down, but then they'd move back up, and then they'd move around and stuff. So it, and by the time we got, because we were going to pull over and take photos or take video, because this was a time where phones didn't really record, because this was a long time ago, but we could still kind of take photos. So we were gonna pull over. We get through the light. We could still see the lights in the sky. We get through the intersection. We pull over, and by the time we're done pulling over, and by the time we get out of the car, they're gone. The lights were gone. There was no trace of them. No light streak or anything. Nothing. The sky was just black again. And the only other time I've seen a couple of different things, I think Arizona's a place to see, obviously with the Phoenix lights. There was another time we were out, way past South Mountain on the reservation, and I was waiting in the car for my friend because he went to go see a local show there. There was a house, and it was in the middle of nowhere. I sit in the car, I'm talking to my friend, and this light kind of comes down, and I could see the mountain because the moon was out, and it was kind of creating a cutout from the moon. You could see it from there, and this light just kind of came down from the sky, and then I could see it like not land on the mountain, but what it did was it went down to the top, but then it like blinked out because you could. It's like when like you see a light like on a car and it goes behind something, and then it came back around, and it kept doing that around the mountain for a little bit, and then it just disappeared. Crazy. I mean, honestly, whenever I hear this and people say, "Oh, it's aliens," right away, like I try and correct them and say, it could be aliens, but because they're called UFOs for a reason. They're unidentified flying objects. That means that the reason why like we call them that is because they're unidentifiable. We don't know what they are. It could be maybe it is a weather balloon, right? Maybe it is flares. Maybe it is some kind of experimental craft. Maybe it's some weather phenomenon, right? But the whole thing is that like it's unidentifiable. We don't know what they are. We don't know what it is. It could be any number of things, and the fact that we don't know is frightening, right? Like the fact that like these things can just appear out of nowhere, and people can lose time. People can literally in the span of like a few seconds, you see them and then they're gone. It's creepy. Like where do they go? Where are they from? Maybe they're extra dimensional. Maybe that's how they're able to get away so fast, right? Who knows? I mean, we won't know until the government has already said, there are UFOs. There are these unidentifiable things in the sky, and they're not saying that they're aliens, but they're just saying that these unidentifiable things exist, and we don't know what they are. Who knows? Maybe at some point we can figure it out with more disclosure from the government. But until then, we're just left with people saying and acknowledging that they've seen these things, and then get told like it's aliens. But like we don't really know. Who knows? So what do you guys think? Do you think some of these are really true, or do you think these are stories of things that can be explained either scientifically or just mundanely? Do you guys have any stories? I'd love to hear them. This actually I found on the internet. All of these. It's from an article by All That's Interesting. I'd like to give them credit for compiling this list and wording everything so elegantly for me. But please, I'd love to hear your guys' personal stories. If you'd love to get that put out for me, or if there's anything like any stories that you've heard or read before, please submit them. You can send them to me. You can DM me on Instagram. I'm at Horrorbox Podcast. And you can also send them in an email to my Gmail, which is horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear any of your stories, any personal or secondhand, or even if it's something you made up. I mean, honestly, I'd love to read anything on here for anyone just to get in that spooky mood. Because spooky doesn't have to be just a one-time around Halloween season. Spooky is a way of life. Being scared is a way of life. Horror is a lifestyle. But until next time, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing, hopefully. Leave a review, please. But yeah, until next time, guys, we'll see what crawls out from the horror box.